Alright, what is up guys? Good lord, I have not uploaded anything on this channel for a while. And I guess some of you can probably assume the reason for that. So, one thing was the Tier 0 Ishizu format that we just came out of the other side of, which I decided just to sit that one out. I couldn't quite afford to build a Ishizu tier limit, and I just don't like Tier 0 formats anyway, even though I know that this one will be fondly remembered in the future. And all due respect to the people that enjoy that format. And the other reason was life just really kind of happened the last couple months, so I didn't have time to go to locals or play at all for the last couple of months. So I came back and I was mostly playing the same decks that I was playing at the end of 2022 with a couple of new things I wanted to try. Certain older strategies kind of faded into obscurity as a new format shaped up and Cash Tier became more dominant. We don't have to really worry about the Ishizu tier limit deck anymore. It's been so heavily hit. Older decks like MathMech are starting to do very well again and become one of the more dominant forces in the meta. And then this deck, the Rika Sun Avalon deck, which is probably my favorite deck that I played last year, is still becoming pretty viable. Now, it's been a while since it's had a top, but recently out of this past weekend, we had the 250th YCSs, and these decks got several tops. So there was at least 3 Rika decks that got top 64 at YCS London. And there was a Rika Pure Plant build that got top 8 in YCS LA, which was very, very strange. I genuinely do not know what was going on with that deck, but massive respect to that gentleman who got 8th place with that deck. Excellent job, even though the build was a massive head-scratcher for a lot of us that like this deck. But this has been a great deck I've had a lot of fun with, as I've explained before. And a lot of the cards got reprinted in the Maze of Memory set, which makes the deck a lot more affordable. However, there is still one card that has not gotten a reprint that is kind of the price gatekeeper with this deck a little bit, and it is the Aromatherapy Jasmine. That card, last time I checked, was still between like $12 and $15. And I want to get a second copy of that for this deck, but I haven't been able to get around to it yet. So this is basically the same deck that I was playing before, but I have made some changes to it, and I've gotten a lot more practice with it since the last time I played it, and I really want to talk about how it's kind of changed for this newest format. Right off the bat, we are still playing the full Sun Avalon package, which I know some people don't play. We're not playing the Therions. It's just Sun Avalon and Rika in this deck, although I may consider trying the Therion package, but I almost feel like that should be its own separate deck entirely, because the Regulus just conflicts with a lot of the plant locks. Sensei Genus Loci lets you have access to your starting combo, and Unexpected Die for this, and keeping your normal for Rika Petal is huge, but even just normal summoning this can still get you to your full combo, so we max out at 3. Some people like to play 2 and 3 Unexpected Die, but 3 Unexpected Die is mandatory, and 3 Sunseed is optional. Of course, we finally have the 1 twin. This is your brick. It is your garnet, but is a necessary part of your opening combo. And it took me like, what, a month to get this card after I was playing the game. Shoutouts to Devin, who I've regularly done collabs with on this channel before with some of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Streams, but he's the one that actually hooked me up with this card. And I greatly appreciate it because it's essential to the combo, and nobody had it in my local area. I could not get a copy of this card for the life of me, but it gets you another body on board when you summon it off of Sunvine Sowing, as opposed to just summoning another copy of Loci. And so it makes sure that you still have a body to point to with Aromatherapy Jasmine when you do that combo, and you can still link up and make Bengal Lancer and do all that stuff. We've got 1 Lone Fire. I think at one point I was playing 2 of this. 1 is just fine. You don't want to normal summon this card if you can help it, because you don't want it to get Ash or whatever. But this is, you summon it off of Aromatherapy Jasmine, and it gives you access to Mudan or any of the other cards that you're missing. So it is pretty powerful. And then we have the Rikas, so 3 of Petal, which on summon lets you search a Rika monster, and it is also a level 1, so we can summon it off of 1 for 1. We can link it into the Sun Avalon link monsters like Dryas, although it doesn't get Dryas' effect because it's not a normal monster. And the floating effect, where it comes back during the end phase, is absolutely critical. You can't forget about that, because every turn you can get another search, which makes the grind game with this deck that much better. So don't forget the fact that it comes back during your opponent's end phase, and then on your turn again, you can search again. It's just really, really good. We've got the 3 Princess. It has a free special summoning clause. No conditions have to be met in order for you to special summon this card, except the fact that it plant locks you after you do it. So it's just a free special summon just because. And it's a negate if it is in your hand and on the field, and tributes a plant to do it. And when you have the field spell up, the Rika Con, that can be tributing one of your opponent's monsters to negate something, which is huge because it's 2 interruptions in 1. Also, being a level 4 means that it combos with the other one we have, the Primula, which can make our rank 4, which is one of the important parts of our combo. Interestingly enough, if you activate Rika Glamour, at the point of resolution, you will have tributed a plant, which makes the effect of this card live. So if you activate Glamour, tribute a plant, you can add 2 4s, and I'll talk about that later. So you can add a Rika card, and you can add a plant with the same level as it, or vice versa, they're both Rikas. So you can add these 2 to hand, and at the point of resolution, because you tributed a plant, this card can special summon itself out of your hand for free at the point of resolution, and then this one special summons itself out just because, and you make a rank 4. We have 2 of Mudam, who was recently reprinted if you guys couldn't get copies of her. Some people like to play this at 3. I'm debating it, but you always find it off of either Glamour or Lone Fire, or just Aromatherapy Jasmine straight into it, because Jasmine doesn't negate the effect, so you can go straight for this card and activate it. This one searches your spell or trap, so it gets you to Con or to Glamour, whichever one you're missing. Getting you to Con also gets you to Glamour, depending on the situation, but if you have Con already established, or if you needed to use Con going second as a board breaker, this would get you to Glamour. And then, of course, I have the 1 Snowdrop. This could be played at 2, but what I opted to do instead, and this is kind of an experimental choice with the deck, it's a new addition, is I'm playing the 1 and I'm playing a Titanial as well. And the reason for this is, like I said, with Glamour, if you tribute a plant, you can add a Rika and a plant with the same level to your hand. So normally what you would only be able to do is you could do 2 1s for a Petal and a Sunseed Genus Loci, or you could do 2 4s to get the Princess and the Primula. But I don't have a way to do 2 8s. So I added an 8 in there that would be really strong on board on its own. And so what that allowed me to do was add both of these to hand if I tribute a monster with Glamour, so that I just get an extra card to hand. You get more value off of the Glamour. And then again, Teardrop tributes a plant, special summons both of these cards out, and does not negate their effect, so her effect is still live. If you don't want to just go for Teardrop with these 2, you can just leave her on board, and she's targeting protection for your plants, which is huge. Even if you have to sack herself, because you already used your Con, let's say, it's still really good. And so I'm practicing this to kind of insulate me from other cards, or cards like Imperm and stuff like that. So I think that having a pair of 8s is just more value for Glamour, and I'm going to see how it works. For hand traps, we just have Ash right now, and we have Imperm. So I was on Nibiru in the main, and we had DD Crow last format, and I traded the DD Crows for the Nibirus. Nibiru is now in the side because of the back and forth dynamic with Kashtira, where it started out where it was this thing where the Kashtira players would just hope that you didn't have Nibiru because they would just auto-lose to it. And then they started intentionally playing around it by just making a Rise Heart pass, which makes Nibiru less good. So it's this weird call of, do I still play Nibiru even though they're playing around it to punish them if they don't play with respect to it? Or do I just take it out because they're never going to play into it? It's this weird decision you have to make, and that's just how metagames evolve over time. But these are really powerful. Obviously, Ash is good against any rogue decks, and it's good against branded for branded fusion and stuff like that. And Imperm is a very versatile going first and going second card. And I decided to make this deck with as many powerful going second cards as possible. And so Imperm to me is just the most useful hand trap for going first and second. And so that's why I decided to include that in. And like I said, Nibiru is in the side. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's it for the monsters and the hand traps. So 3 unexpected die. This card is absurd. If you open this card plus Petal is probably your best combo, because if you don't have to use your normal summon on Sunseed Genus Loci, then it's huge. I've also had, if this gets negated, you can still activate it again because you still meet the summoning conditions of it. It's not a once per turn activation. It's just you have to control no monsters. So if this gets ashed or whatever, you can just activate another copy if you have one from hand. It's not a once per turn activation, even if the activation gets negated. We have the 3 Con. This card is, of course, the card that brings the whole deck together. So the advantage of playing a weird rogue deck like this, especially when it first becomes powerful, is the idea that people don't know what your cards do. And the thing that's what made like DDD powerful early last year. It's what made this deck powerful. It's what made Mathmech powerful for a while. Having the deck that's the rogue underdog, you have an inherent advantage when your opponent doesn't know what your cards do. And that was what made this deck so powerful early on. However, because it had a YCS top and it has had a couple of tops since then, people are a little bit more aware of what these cards do. And this card is a magnet for destruction and interruption from your opponent. So you have to be able to like bait out your opponent's interruptions with this card, and it is a very powerful going second board breaker, because if your opponent has board breakers set up, they're going to know that they are at risk because this card can potentially tribute them as you resolve the rest of your combo. And so I kind of built in some counterplay with this, and I'll talk about a card I'm using in conjunction with that, but we also, of course, have the 3 Glamour. I don't think this card... No, I think it did. I think this was like an Ultra in Maze, which is a little bit disappointing, but it's still incredibly much cheaper than the Secret Rare. But yeah, this card is absolutely mandatory. So it's a Searcher by default, but it's a double Searcher if you have the ability to tribute a plant, and you can tribute one of your opponent's plants, which I think there's weird situations where... The only thing to keep in mind with this is the interaction I mentioned with Primula. It says a monster you control is tributed. It doesn't say a plant or a monster is tributed. So if you tribute one of your opponent's monsters to activate Glamour and you get the pair of 2 monsters and you go for the 4 and the 4, you can't do like I mentioned earlier where you summon the Primula. It's an interaction you have to keep in mind, but other than that, this is potentially, again, these two combined are a double Searcher and a board breaker, or just a double Searcher, or it procs some of your other effects, like the rank 4 makes it into the rank 8, etc. 2 Sunvine Sowing, because if we lose one of them due to Kashtira, like milling them off the top of our deck, we still want to have another copy in deck. And then it gives protection in the graveyard for our Link monsters, which is usually just Bengal Lancer or the Sylvan Link monster. So your opponent often forgets about that, but it's not extremely powerful. Also, having another copy in deck means you can go through the Sunseed Genus Loci into Dryas line a second time, because we play more than one copy of each card during that combo. So being able to go through that entire line a second time is really, really strong. So I'm main decking 3 triple tack, and the main reason for this is, like I said, I want good going second cards, and of course this is one of the best ones in the game. And like I said, Con is going to bait out a lot of your opponent's interruptions because they don't want their guys getting tributed. So if they have like a pop or a negate, they're going to spend that on the Con, and this makes this card live. So the take control effect is absurdly powerful. The draw 2 effect is pretty powerful because you could potentially draw into another Con, or a Terraforming, or a Mudan, or something else to get you to another Con, so it's not a total loss. Shoutouts to a good buddy of mine, Joey, who plays Sword Soul, and I pretty much lose to him every single time he plays Sword Soul. But a combination of this card plus Con, he went first with Sword Soul, which I kind of always thought Sword Soul was almost like a blind going second deck, because they seem like they're much more powerful going second than first. But I completely broke his board and took the match off of him with a combination of those 2 cards. So triple tack in the main is huge for me right now. And then the last of the main deck is 1 Terraforming to search Con. This Secret Rare looks terrible, by the way. You can barely see the foil in there at all. 1 for 1 to get you to Petal or to Loci, incredibly powerful card. Call by the Grave, which I guess is the 41st card, but I wouldn't really cut it. And then the 1 Rika. This card is incredible if you have everything set up correctly, because it's like a preemptive monster negate. You can't actually negate a monster. You can't activate this in response to a monstrous effect to negate. It has to be like preemptively. And you can also tribute a guy, and you can also take control of a guy. So it's like 2 to 3 interruptions in one, depending on when you activate it and what the circumstances are. And even if you don't have Con up and you want to tribute one of your guys to take control of one of your opponent's monsters, that's still pretty powerful. Yeah, it's pretty insane. So that's it for the main deck. It's 41 cards. Like I said, the call by is the 41st card, I believe. So onto the extra deck, we've got the 3 Dryas for that main combo line that we do. The 2 Healer, just so we can do the combo a second time. And of course, you can use Healer, target Dryas, gain 300 life points so you can win in time if needed. That's never come up for me, by the way, but I'm sure it happens. We've got the 1 Aromatherapy Jasmine. I would change this to 2. I would actually cut a card I'm going to talk about later for this because of Kashtira. I don't want them sniping this out of my extra deck with Diabolos. So I would actually play 2 of this, but I just haven't wanted to invest the money in a second copy because she's really expensive. So I'm hoping we get like an OTS reprint or something of this card because it's long overdue for it. We've got the Sylvan Dance Peony, which is a backup plan for this deck, but that list that got top 8 at the YCS LA played like 2 or 3 of this, and it was like their main combo enabler, which is really cool. A lot of respect for that, but I try not to do that, but it is what it is. It's just a play style preference. And then we have the 1 Melios, which just lets you link climb into Bengal Lancer, which is one of your end boss monsters. Very, very strong. Your opponents typically don't know what this card does. And the fact that you can bring him back is also really strong. Taking a lot of the burn damage to use his effect is pretty costly, but the type of removal that he enables is worth it. Then for the Exceeds, we have the 2 Strenna. So Strenna is part of your initial combo. I actually upgraded to 2 copies of Teardrop, and the reason for that, of course, we got the reprint in Maze. We have one in Ultra and Secret. I just need to get the Collector's Rare one. Not that I would play 3 copies in this deck. We cut the Sunvine Thrasher for a second Teardrop because of Kashtira. So I figured that they would try to snipe her out of the extra deck if there was only 1 copy. So if they do that, there's not as much value. But that probably just puts a target on Aromatherapy Jasmine's head. So I kind of want to make sure I run 2 of those. We have the 1 Sacred Tree Beast, which is what you float into off of Strenna. And it's always a monster negate, but it can potentially be a spell negate as well because we run a lot of spells in the graveyard. So you want to try to get that spell negate on this guy if you can. And then the 1 Alcay, which most people run, but I actually would love... This would be the card I would cut for the second Aromatherapy Jasmine. Not because it's bad, but I almost would rather always make these 2, and I just kind of feel bad about that. I'd almost never make this guy. I think I've made him all of 1 time playing this deck, and so I just don't feel like the effect is good enough to justify keeping him in there. I would rather just have the second Jasmine so that I don't lose to Diabolos. And that's it for the extra deck. Onto the side. I'm not completely married to this side. A lot of people still like to play a pointer in this deck. A lot of the lists I've seen online, people are still on a pointer. A pointer makes a lot of sense at 3. To me, personally, it makes absolutely 0 sense at 1. It's an unsearchable, sacky one of, and I don't think it really even does that much for this deck as opposed to any other deck. So I don't know why people are so married to a pointer. In this deck, I've seen some people maining it. Tangent aside, Nibiru, like we talked about, it thrashes a lot of road decks, and it is a weird meta call against Kashtira because, again, they basically auto-lose to it, but everyone is playing with respect to it nowadays, so it's almost never going to come up. Dark Ruler is another going second tool, which I don't think we get a lot of value out of in this format. Same thing with Lightning Storm here. Lightning Storm is actually mainly there for the Labyrinth matchup to hit the back row, which I'm told is also potentially problematic, and the Lightning Storm is not all that good this format. But I finally got to play 7 of it, so I want to play it. I was tempted to either play 3 Book of Moon, 3 Book of Eclipse, but what I settled on is actually Book of Lunar Eclipse, which is the double Book of Moon. Now, the problem is, if they end on exactly a Rise Heart Pass, then this card does nothing because it has to target 2 monsters. So they need to have 2 things on board for you to target with this. So maybe Book of Moon would have been better, or even Book of Eclipse. But I worry about Book of Eclipse, and Book of Eclipse can be ashed, which is something that doesn't necessarily always come up, but it is something to think about. So for most decks, like against Sword Soul or Branded, this is still really good and can potentially be really good against Kashtira if I draw into it. But I'm going to see how this performs, and then I may change it. I may run a 3 Book of Moon, a 3 Book of Eclipse instead of these, and of course the 1 Feather Duster for more back row decks, because I actually don't have a 3rd copy of this. I would want to run an even playset, but I only have 2 of those, so the 3rd one is just a Feather Duster for now. And then 3 Rivalry against any deck that is not monotype, which unfortunately is a lot of decks right now are not monotype, but Branded's not monotype, so you can take advantage of this. If they have like Aluber on field, you can prevent them from summoning pretty much anything from their extra deck, which is pretty cool. The only decks that really play under this, of course, Sword Soul likes to play this card, and then I want to say there's mismatched typings in Kashtira because you have a lot of psychics, but then you have like machines and other crap in the extra deck, which are really interesting. So yeah, this card definitely comes up a lot in a monotype deck. So yeah, that's about all I have to say for this deck. I am still loving this deck to pieces, and I still plan on playing it a bunch more. I'll let you guys know how I feel about the particular cards. Also, something that I was debating on, something I'm playing around with, is I have a project where I want to, me and my friends who I'm teaching how to play the game, which you may have seen some of the speed duel videos, like my friend Shannon and of course my wife Michelle and all that. I want to do a thing where we build decks from scratch using bulk. And I have put a small plant package in there that has like some Lone Fire Blossoms, some of the Rika cards. It doesn't have Concon, it doesn't have Teardrop, but it does have the ability to make like Strenna into Sacred Tree Beast, which is cool. So I'm curious to see if anybody's going to pick that up. But yeah, I basically have hand selected this massive stack of cards and made like a draft pile out of it. And we're all going to get together and build decks out of that soon with like little pieces of little incidental engines here and there. And I'm really looking forward to showing you guys the deck profiles for what they build with that whenever we get around to doing it. So definitely look forward to that. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.